7 News on your side at 11 starts now.
And tonight, the nation is gripped with anxiety after former President Trump is shot in an apparent assassination attempt. It happened during a rally earlier this evening in Pennsylvania. Trump had just taken the stage at that event when shots rang out, striking the former president's ear. And now, according to officials, the shooter as well as at least one bystander are dead, and the former president is said to be fine. But the gravity of the moment cannot be overstated, as again, officials say they are investigating the incident as a possible assassination attempt. After the shots were fired, the former president rushed off the stage, blood visible running down his face. And after the former president was taken from the stage, Secret Service took down the shooter as panicked witnesses were left wondering what just happened.
He was dead the minute he was hit.
And now, law enforcement sources telling ABC News that the shooter fired at least 8 rounds from an AR-style rifle before he was killed by Secret Service agents responding to those gunshots. All of this as multiple agencies are reacting, and a massive investigation is underway into who the shooter was and how all of this happened. Meanwhile, MPD telling us here in Washington, D.C. that they are increasing security across the city tonight as a precaution. And as the situation is being investigated, the question lingers, how did we get to this point? We are joined now by national correspondent Kayla Gaskins in our Washington bureau. Kayla, already calls from lawmakers for a larger investigation.
Yeah, Scott, so House Speaker Mike
Biden saying he is pausing all campaign messaging to supporters in response to the shooting, and also working to pull down all of his television ads as quickly as possible. 7 News' Liana Golden's at the White House tonight. Liana, what did the president have to say about this terrible situation? Thank you, Carl. As we continue to learn more about the shooting at Trump's rally, lawmakers on both sides of the aisle are expressing their concern for the former president, many taking to social media. Vivek Ramaswamy, Marco Rubio, Ted Cruz, all sharing the same picture with the message that read, "God bless President Trump," and "grateful to God for protecting him." Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin was one of the first to tweet after the shooting, saying, "Suzanne and I are praying for President Trump, praying for his family, and praying for America." Maryland's Governor Wes Moore also sharing his thoughts about the shooting, writing, "Political violence is never acceptable, ever. This kind of cowardice must be roundly condemned by all Americans."
7 News is on your side, closely tracking the impact and recovery efforts of the bridge collapse in Baltimore. We do have team coverage tonight. Scott Thuman is anchoring live in Baltimore, as well as our Brad Bell and Tom Rousey. We do want to start with Scott. So, Scott, what is the latest from the ground?
Yeah, Michelle, you know, whenever you're at an incident like this, there is kind of that sobering quiet that sometimes accompanies it. It's no different here. This is a road that typically would have, as Brad Bell has told me, about 30,000 vehicles crossing through each day. And you look at it now and you can see just how quiet, how empty all of this is. And as photographer Frank Becker pushes on with the camera here, you're going to see how that on-ramp to the bridge just ends in the air. And beyond that, all of that mangled metal that is sitting on top of that cargo ship. How big is this ship? It's 985 feet. A little bit of perspective. You put that upright, that's almost the size of the Eiffel Tower. There's 1.5 million gallons of fuel on board, 50 cargo containers with hazardous material. All of that leading up to the fact that this is going to take a whole of government response. We heard from the White House today, Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg talking about the steps that have to take place next.
For us, again, I think it's too soon to speculate.
But we, of course, can't look past the most immediate factor here, and that is a loss of life. 6 people that we know of who have died in this incident. And we've continued to look into their stories. We'll have more of that throughout tonight's newscast. In the meantime, they have recovered the black box from the ship. They're looking into causes, how to avoid this from potentially happening again in the future. And as we look at some of the other factors regarding those 6 men, we hear now from reporter Jessica Babb from our sister station WBFF.
Well, family members.
I want to bring in our Maryland Bureau Chief Brad Bell now, because Brad, you've been covering this from the first moments. Now we're at a point where we're focusing a lot on the recovery efforts and the dive teams, those people who are putting forth really their own safety and health as well to try and get some sort of resolution here. What do we know?
Yeah, that's exactly what we said. The governor said the focus is on recovery. He made that promise to the families. And they did do some work.
Yeah, and a lot of work still to go.
Yeah.
Brad, thanks so much. As we stand here, though, the rain starting to come down yet again. Another challenge for everyone involved in this. Let's get back into the studio to Michelle and to VJ to talk about the conditions, the weather, how all of these are impacts.
Yeah,
Guys?
as if Scott and Brad, they are not up against, these dive teams aren't up against enough.
You referenced Secretary Pete Buttigieg, Department of Transportation. He said this is obviously a major import-export location for the country, but also the biggest for handling vehicles getting into the United States. So when it comes to commerce, it is a real linchpin to making sure that so many other places can function as designed. Of course, you also have 8,000 employees in this immediate area who have a direct connection to this port. So you're talking about a lot of people who are wondering what their tomorrow will look like. We know that the Maryland state legislature, with only 2 weeks left in this session, is trying to address that with an emergency bill. Our Mackenzie Frost from our sister station in Baltimore has been covering that. Mackenzie, the questions are what exactly would be in this bill, and does it look like there's a likelihood of it being passed in this time with all things considered and the urgency surrounding this issue? We are seeing a seminal moment in American political history tonight as President Biden ends his re-election campaign. He is quitting and now out of the race. What he had to say upon backing out. Reaction pouring in from across the political spectrum and right here in the DMV. A look at how we got here. Plus, the president also throwing his endorsement to Vice President Kamala Harris. But will the Democratic Party agree? The path forward. And a look at the race now.
Seven News on your side at 6:30 starts now.
We begin with that breaking news. President Biden has ended his campaign for re-election, drawing an end to his administration's bid for another 4 years in office. I'm Scott Thuman. Thank you for joining us for this special coverage. The president making that announcement today by posting a statement on X in which he outlined the achievements of his administration, but then went on to say that, quote, "It has been the greatest honor of my life to serve you as president, and while it has been my intention to seek re-election, I believe it is in the best interest of my party and the country for me to stand down and to focus solely on fulfilling my duties as president for the remainder of my term." Thank you, Carl. And right here in the district, the president's decision to end his campaign has some immediate consequences. This as we prepare for a big week on Capitol Hill, as well as a visit from Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. 7 News reporter Rebecca Turco is live at the White House tonight. And Rebecca, what's the mood like out there at this hour? Tonight, if you are just joining us, the race for the White House has taken a dramatic turn. President Biden has dropped out, throwing more uncertainty into the already chaotic process. President Biden says he is fully behind Vice President Kamala Harris now taking the top of the ticket. However, there are plenty of other names being mentioned, either as the nominee or as a Harris running mate. They range from Secretary Pete Buttigieg to Governors Gavin Newsom or J.B. Pritzker, Gretchen Whitmer, Wes Moore, Josh Shapiro, although he's now throwing his support behind Kamala Harris. Hakeem Jeffries up on the Hill, Dean Phillips as well. Governor Andy Beshear not on that picture, but also being mentioned from Kentucky. So let's bring in Dave Lucas into the conversation now. The biggest question tonight, Dave, my good colleague with all the insight we can muster, is Harris going to easily pick up that torch and run with it? Or is there going to be a big melee for that coveted spot? They're down to just weeks before the convention. Dave, the writing really had been on the wall now for some time for Biden to step aside. Does this make it a lot easier for the party to come together?
I think it does make it easier.
Yeah, transitional. And then very quickly, Dave, 15 seconds here. Republicans push for this, but could this backfire?
I'd be careful what you wish for. It might.
Dave Lucas, thanks so much for your time on this major breaking news day. We appreciate it, as always. Coming up here on 7 News, we're going to take a look back at the last time a president stepped aside. Dave just referenced it. As such a rare moment has now drastically altered the race. All right, thank you, Mark. Tonight is a night that historians will be studying for years, as a sitting president has now chosen to end his campaign for re-election. But while this has happened before, it has never happened so close to an actual election. So what does this mean for the nation? Peter Loge now joining us live via Zoom, an associate professor of media and public affairs at the George Washington University. Peter, good to see you. The last time that we saw something like this was back when LBJ stepped aside in 1968. What similarities do you see right now between these two moments in time?
Almost none. Both conventions will be in Chicago. It's a whole different world we're in now.
Everyone's wondering what happens next for this year's presidential campaign, obviously. What can we learn from situations of the past and how they might affect what's going on now?
You know, that's a really good question. The first thing I would do is caution about overlearning.
Right now at 5, 7 News team coverage from GW University after an early morning operation to clear pro-Palestine demonstrators. The move sparking intense criticism and the question, why now? 7 News gets answers from the mayor and police chief. A local school official in the spotlight on Capitol Hill. The topic, addressing anti-Semitism. Why a local Islamic American group argues today's hearing is far from fair.
Plus, could the DMV be in for weather like this? We're on severe alert for Thursday. I'll have the threats and the timing.
And as we come on the air, new fallout, new reaction after MPD cleared out the encampment of pro-Palestine protesters here on the campus of George Washington University, and all of it coming just hours before the mayor and police chief were set to testify on Capitol Hill about how the city has been handling this over the past 2 weeks. Good evening, I'm Scott Thuman. What we've really seen, the big difference, is how secure everything is. There are police behind me, there's campus security, police tape, more barricades, and what they've done is made sure that anyone who was pushed out early this morning, around 4 a.m., can't easily come back in. They were given 6 warnings, police tell us, before they moved in. At least 33 people were arrested. One big question, though, really is why all of it happened now? Why today in these early hours? D.C.'s police chief and the mayor say after weeks of trying methods to de-escalate all of the tension out here that things were no longer deemed safe, and that's why officers moved in.
I want to be clear.
Now things are picking up a little bit activity-wise. As you hear more sirens, you see more police. They're gathering behind me, but it's kind of tough to see. And as I can show you here, we've got another photographer on scene. That's Matt Mosley. He's got a different vantage point. So let's take his live image right now and give you another angle where you can see what was just about a dozen police officers. Our Kelly Lynn is on Capitol Hill. She's been following that part of the story, and we're going to go to her now live. And I just want to give you a heads up as I'm watching. You know what? Let's hang on one sec before we go to Kelly. You pan to the right here, Marco. Look at this further group of support of police officers coming in, lights and sirens now. And just so you know, we're on H Street and 20th, and they've been pulling into this parking lot that gives them closer access to the yard that's been cleared out. So sorry to put you on standby there, Kelly, for a second. We just want to show you what's happening because the numbers have increased dramatically as far as police presence, and not just being present, but getting out of their cars. We've also seen some vans pull up in case they have to make mass arrests.
Now, Scott, back to you.
Anti-Semitism, obviously a big issue nationwide. And coming up, we're going to talk with our national correspondent, Matt Galka, who's going to give us a little bigger picture look at what's going on. And I do, right before we toss it back to you, Michelle, I just want to point out, as we see a lot of activity here, I talked to a police officer who said 2 things are happening. One, you've got about 40 more people down at the other end of the street now who are just being loud, not being violent, but creating a little bit of a concern. So that's why you're seeing movement. There's also a shift change. So there's a lot going on here as we continue to see cops pour in and out. We're just kind of keeping tabs on things.